Picture this for a second. Two men, one single photograph. Just 3 days after that picture was snapped, both of those men were dead. And when search teams finally tracked down their bodies, miles apart by the way, deep within a valley that locals absolutely refused to set foot in after dark, they found something bizarre. Everything was perfectly intact. I'm talking their tent, their food, their gear. Literally everything was right where it should be. Well, except for their heads.
Now, let me be super clear right out of the gate here. What we're diving into today, it's not some spooky campfire ghost story meant to scare kids. As you'll see in this explainer, this is documented history. It's officially recorded, fact-checked, and filed away right there in the archives of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. We are looking at a genuinely forbidding location that boasts over a century of strange disappearances, completely unexplainable decapitations, and just brutal, brutal deaths.
Section 1. The Nahanni Valley in the Northwest Territories, Canada. This is a deeply isolated, incredibly unforgiving place, sliced right down the middle by a violent, unpredictable river. But you know what? The river really isn't the most dangerous part.
The Dene people have called the area around the Nahanni Valley home for thousands of years. And for that entire time, they've passed down a very specific piece of folklore. They talk about something called the Nukework, the Bushman. It's described as this towering, dark-furred creature that moves through the mountain trees with a silence that is just deeply, horribly wrong. According to the stories, it's not a bear, and it's definitely not a man. It's something kind of in between, and every single story agrees on one crucial detail. It violently rejects visitors. In fact, this silent, terrifying presence is the exact reason why the locals absolutely refuse to enter that valley after the sun goes down.
Moving into Section 2, the foundational mystery, the McLeod brothers. Let's dive into the very first documented case that really established this valley's terrifying reputation.
We need to anchor ourselves back in the year 1908. Willie and Frank McLeod were incredibly pragmatic guys. They were experienced woodsmen who knew the wilderness inside and out. So, before heading out into this massive expanse, they did exactly what smart survivalists do, right? They told their family their exact plans. They laid out exactly where they were going and precisely when they'd be back. But 1908 came and went. Then 1909. Then 1910. The brothers had simply vanished. Completely.
It wasn't until 3 years later, in 1911, that a search party finally pushed far enough into the valley to locate them. And what they found was just completely baffling. The campsite was exactly as the brothers had left it. I mean, the tent was still standing, the supplies were totally untouched, all of their equipment was sitting there in pristine condition. From a distance, it looked like a totally normal campsite. That is, until the search party walked a little further out and stumbled upon two skeletons.
Both of them missing their heads. The bones were partially buried in the dirt, but here's the detail that makes the official report so incredibly chilling. The investigators noted there was absolutely no sign of a struggle. None. There was no blood anywhere. No weapons discarded nearby, just two completely decapitated men left out there in the dirt. So, what was the official cause of death written down for the McLeod brothers? Simply one word: unknown. Section 3. A century-long pattern. The escalation in the valley. You see, the McLeod brothers weren't just an isolated incident. They were really just the start of a deeply disturbing and repeating pattern. Just take a look at this brutal timeline here. It brilliantly illustrates how a steady stream of prospectors met the exact same gruesome fate. In 1917, prospector Martin Jorgensen's body was found, and you guessed it, his head was never recovered. Fast forward to 1922, John O'Brien vanishes. When his remains are finally discovered 2 years later, he's decapitated. Jump again to 1932, Phil Powers disappears. His body turns up in 1933, and again, no head. It's a precise, escalating, and incredibly violent pattern. Unsurprisingly, by the time the 1940s rolled around, almost nobody wanted to go anywhere near Nahanni anymore. But those few trappers and adventurers who did go in, and actually managed to survive, came back with some deeply unsettling stories. We're talking reports of phantom footsteps following them in the forest when they knew they were completely alone. They found non-human tracks that were massive, just not quite right. Look at this chilling quote from a trapper who was interviewed back in 1956. He said, "You know when you're being hunted. You feel it in your gut. Like something's just out of sight, waiting." That trapper, by the way, he survived, but he never, ever went back.
Which brings us to Section 4, the 1965 escalation. We're going to look at the highly detailed case of Robert Winter and James Callahan.
Let's map out their exact timeline, because it's wild. On June 12th, these guys entered the valley hunting for gold.
For the first few weeks, everything was completely normal. They were sending short letters back home, giving updates, and reporting absolutely nothing out of the ordinary. And then, boom. On June 28th, all communication abruptly ceased. So, by mid-July, a search party is organized. And guys, history completely repeats itself here. The searchers arrive to find a pristine, totally intact campsite. Tents are up, food is entirely undisturbed, equipment is neatly arranged. But the men? Nowhere to be found.
Now look at the completely impossible geography of this setup. On one hand, we have Robert Winter. He's found face down in a creek bed, fully clothed with absolutely zero visible injuries on his body, except his head is gone. Now, compare that to his partner, James Callahan. He's found 3 days later, a full 5 miles away in the complete opposite direction, and he is in the exact same condition. No visible bodily injuries whatsoever, but missing his head. How does that even happen?
So what do the authorities actually say about two men found headless 5 miles apart with perfectly intact campsites? Well, the coldly bureaucratic official conclusion from the RCMP stated, deaths by misadventure. Cause of decapitation? Unknown. They literally just dismissed these horrific, unexplainable events as tragic accidents. Misadventure. Crazy, right? Section 5. The buried details. Because we need to talk about what that official report conveniently decided to gloss over. You see, when you dig past that broad, neat conclusion of misadventure, you start finding these granular, deeply unsettling anomalies that completely defy logic. For instance, when investigators examined Robert Winter's body, they noticed his boots were caked in a very specific kind of mud. The thing is, this mud only exists in one swampy area of the valley, which was a full 10 miles away from where his body was actually dumped. Did he run 10 miles in a panic? Was he carried? We don't know. And then there's James Callahan. When they found his body, his hand was tightly gripping something, a clump of hair. It was coarse, thick, and it was officially noted as being non-human.
Section 6. The Truth and the Folklore. Let's look at how these cold, hard facts bridge right back to that thousands of years old Dene belief system. Remember the Nukwuk? The Dene people have described it for centuries as this creature standing 7 to 8 feet tall. It's supposed to be highly territorial, incredibly patient, and it violently removes anyone who overstays their welcome. Local belief in this entity is so deeply ingrained that it strictly dictates exactly where indigenous people will and will not travel. There are certain areas they just avoid entirely. There are disappearances they simply refuse to speak about, because in their culture, talking about it invites attention. And as we've seen, drawing attention in the Nahanni Valley can be fatal.
Ultimately, whether you believe all of this is just a series of incredibly bizarre natural phenomena, isolated murders, wild animal attacks, or something else entirely, the takeaway from the source material is exactly the same. Sometimes the absolute most dangerous thing in the world isn't a monster. It's just a place where the normal rules of reality simply do not apply, where no one is coming to look for you. It's this untamed antagonist, where whatever lives up in those mountains has been operating long, long before we ever had a name for it.
The Nahanni River is still running today, right now. That valley is still sitting there in total, eerie isolation. And, chillingly enough, people are still disappearing inside of it. So, after seeing the timelines, looking at the missing heads, the perfectly intact campsites, and those completely impossible distances, the only real question left to ask yourself is this: would you go in?